Black tire marks scorched the dry soil as the black SUV came to a jerking stop outside the tall, metal security gates of the safari reserve. The back door flung open before the dust could even settle. A woman, barefoot and bruised, was pushed out hard, her body stumbling across the rough dirt. Her silk dress hung in tatters, stained with blood and dirt. She clutched her visibly swollen belly as she tried to stand, legs trembling. A man in a gray security uniform turned sharply toward the rear. "Sir, she's 7 months." He began, but a cold voice shut him down. "She signed the NDA," a man growled. "She won't talk." Liam stepped forward, his expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. Clad in a charcoal suit, not a crease out of place, he stared at the woman without blinking. Not a flicker of regret crossed his face. Standing beside him was Bianca, wrapped in a tight red dress that glittered in the setting sun. Her smile was vicious, calculated. "She'll be fine," Bianca said coolly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. The guard hesitated, caught between protocol and the silent threat hanging in the air. The moment stretched. Behind them, the metal gates groaned and began to swing inward. The woman on the ground lifted her eyes, fear burning through the dirt on her face. "Liam?" she whispered, her voice cracking. He didn't even flinch. He turned around. Bianca slid her arm through his and leaned in. "Let the lions take care of the rest," she whispered, just loud enough for the guard to hear. The SUV engine roared back to life and the vehicle pulled away. The massive gate slammed shut, the lock clicking behind them with a chilling finality. A sign bolted into the fence read in bold yellow lettering, "Caution, predators, do not exit vehicle." Ava coughed, blood mixing with dust on her lips. She tried to stand but winced, placing a protective hand over her belly. Her other hand scraped the dirt for support. The sun was dipping low now, casting long shadows between the trees. Distant roars echoed through the reserve, deep, guttural, and far too close. She turned, dragging herself toward the nearest slope, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The reserve stretched for miles. There were no roads, no structures in sight, just tall grass, scattered trees, and predators hidden behind every rustling leaf. Branches cracked somewhere behind her. She froze, listening. Her heart raced as the sound came again, deliberate, heavy, not wind, not harmless. Her eyes scanned the field, panic flooding every muscle in her body. She knew this land. It wasn't just wild, it was built to keep tourists terrified inside protected vehicles. And now she was outside of one, bleeding, unarmed, and alone. She forced herself up with a cry, stumbling forward through thorny bushes, ignoring the cuts that scratched across her arms. A wooden watchtower stood far ahead, nearly swallowed by overgrown brush. She moved toward it, limping hard, one arm clutching her side. Behind her, the bushes rustled again. This time, closer, faster. Her breathing turned into gasps as she quickened her pace, dragging her injured leg through the eye. "Grass!" A growl split the silence. Ava turned just in time to see 2 golden eyes glinting through the tall grass. A lioness, massive, silent, watching. Tears burned in Ava's eyes as she backed away. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and useless. Another lion stepped out beside the first, then a third. A pride. The circle was forming, with a guttural scream of effort. She lunged toward the wooden tower, crashing against the old ladder. Her hands slipped on the dry wood as she climbed, every inch a battle. The lions didn't charge. They stalked, patient, confident in her weakness. But the tower held. She made it to the small platform above just before her legs gave out entirely. She collapsed, gasping, bleeding, shaking uncontrollably. Her belly rose and fell with sharp breaths. Her unborn child stirred inside her. She wasn't safe. Not really. The wooden tower was old and exposed, but it was high enough to buy time. The lions circled below, One pawed the ladder. Another sniffed the blood trail she'd left behind. But they didn't climb. Not yet. From above, Ava watched as the SUV drove along the outer rim of the reserve, heading toward the exit checkpoint. Liam sat in the back, eyes straight ahead. Bianca leaned back in her seat, sipping from a champagne flute. A drone camera hovered briefly above them, filming promotional content for their new wildlife retreat. A perfect couple. Perfect legacy. No mention of the woman left to die in the heart of the reserve. A nightbird cried out. The last of the light faded. The lions didn't leave. They sat at the base of the tower, patient, regal, breathing in the scent of fear. Ava held her belly tightly, closing her eyes only for seconds at a time. She whispered softly to the baby, rocking gently in her pain. She didn't cry anymore. There were no more tears left to shed. In the distance, the faint echo of a laugh, Bianca's laugh, echoed through the night air as the safari estate erupted in celebration. Fireworks boomed in the far distance. A new era was being toasted, one without Ava in it. But in the wild, under the moonlight, the lions stayed, watching, waiting. And somehow, impossibly, they never climbed. The night dragged on in silence except for the low growls below the tower. Ava's body ached, her skin raw from thorns and splinters. But she didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her fingers clutched the wooden beam as if it were her lifeline. And in a way, it was. Every now and then, she would call out, "Help! Somebody, please!" Her voice broke into the emptiness. No headlights, no patrols, no rescue. The lions stayed nearby, sometimes vanishing into the shadows only to reappear closer, circling. But they never climbed. She didn't know. Why? She only knew she had to stay above ground, even as her body begged to collapse. The sun eventually began to rise, pale and slow, but it brought no help with it. Just heat. And hunger. A few miles away, at the edge of the private estate, luxury music drifted across the manicured gardens of the hilltop mansion. Waiters in crisp white uniforms carried silver trays, weaving through guests draped in designer labels. Laughter floated through the air as champagne glasses clinked under the chandeliers. Liam stood at the center of it all, nodding, smiling, every bit the charming philanthropist. The banners above the courtyard read, "Wildlife Healing Trust, Gala Fundraiser." The same trust Ava had spent 5 years building. Now stripped of her name. Bianca descended the grand staircase slowly, her red gown flowing behind her, hugging her newly acquired baby bump. Cameras turned instantly. The press leaned in as she posed at the base of the stairs, one hand resting on her stomach, the other laced in Liam's. Reporters fired questions. "Bianca, is it true you're expecting?" She turned, smiling graciously. "Yes, we're overjoyed. We've kept it private, but the timing felt right. It's a blessing." "And Ava?" one bold reporter asked, his mic stretching forward. Liam's smile didn't falter. "She's taking time away, some personal healing. She's checked into a wellness center for emotional support. We ask for privacy." Bianca leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to sound exclusive. "She's where she needs to be. We love her, but she wasn't well." The crowd nodded. Some smiled. The story was perfectly rehearsed, wrapped in polite sympathy. No one questioned it. Ava had vanished, and the replacement had already stepped in. Bianca's earrings glinted under the chandelier as she posed again. 2 diamond-studded sapphire drops that sparkled like stolen stars. In the corner, near the catering table, a former maid named Elise paused mid-tray. Her eyes narrowed. She'd seen those earrings before. On Ava, nearly every Thursday morning. They were a gift from Ava's mother, never worn by anyone else. Elise's lips parted slightly, her eyes scanning the room. She stepped forward, just one hesitant step. But Bianca noticed. She always noticed. Elise didn't get halfway across the ballroom before a man in a gray suit gently tapped her shoulder and motioned toward the service exit. She was escorted out quietly, without a scene. No one asked where she went. Back in the reserve, Ava's lips were dry and cracked. She had stopped screaming. Her voice no longer worked. Her hair clung to her face, soaked with sweat. The sun beat down on the wooden tower, baking it like an oven. She could barely shift her weight. Below, the lions still prowled. One lay in the shade beneath the platform, its golden eyes watching her, unmoving. The other two wandered nearby, disinterested, but never gone. She knew they could take her if they wanted, but they hadn't. A rusted water pipe on the edge of the platform caught her eye. With the last of her strength, she crawled toward it and twisted the valve. Nothing. She slapped it, kicked it, a sputter, then a drip, then a slow stream of warm, gritty water. She didn't care. She drank until she choked. Her stomach clenched. Her baby shifted again. She whispered, barely audible, "We're not dying here." The celebration at the mansion roared on. Liam gave his speech, thanking donors and sponsors for believing in their conservation mission. He praised the community, toasted to new beginnings, and shed a single tear when referencing Ava's health journey. The crowd applauded, touched, cameras rolled. Social media posts exploded with hashtags of new legacy and heir on the way. And there she stood beside him, Bianca, glowing, untouched, holding the very empire she didn't build. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, suspense-filled stories like this one. Later that evening, after the cameras packed up and the last dessert trays cleared, Liam and Bianca retired to the private wing of the mansion. She sat in front of a gold-framed mirror, carefully removing her earrings. "That maid," she said casually, "the one near the ice sculpture. Do you remember her name?" Liam poured himself a drink, not looking up. "Don't think so." She knew those earrings. "We'll need to erase the staff records again, just in case." "Already handled," Liam replied, sipping his scotch. Bianca stood and looked at her reflection. "I want her dress next," she murmured. "The one from her wedding. The neckline was perfect." He nodded without expression. "I'll have it replicated." Ava, meanwhile, remained curled on the platform, the sky above her now turning deep, orange again. Another night was coming. Her limbs trembled from exhaustion. Her fingernails were cracked. But her eyes, they remained open, focused, watching. In her silence, the betrayal became clearer. Liam hadn't acted out of emotion. There were no screams, no fights, no guilt. This was calculated, strategic, premeditated. The foundation, the inheritance, the trust fund, all hers by law until she was erased. They didn't want her gone. They needed her forgotten. But lions remember, and one day, so would everyone else. The first time Ava heard footsteps, she thought they belonged to the lions. Her body was too weak to run, too broken to scream. But the figure that emerged from the haze wasn't a predator. It was a man in a sun-bleached ranger's uniform, carrying a faded satchel and a long walking stick. His steps were careful, like someone trained to respect the wild. His weathered face froze as he spotted her half-curled, on the tower platform, barely moving, her skin pale and streaked with blood and dirt. Without a word, he scaled the ladder and knelt beside her, checking her pulse. She didn't speak, just stared at him with dull, glassy eyes. But she was alive. He didn't waste time. He wrapped her in his coat, secured her onto a makeshift stretcher of thick rope and canvas, and began the long, quiet walk out of the reserve under the cover of dawn. No radio, no calls. He said nothing, and neither did she. It took hours to reach his small, hidden cabin nestled deep within the tree line, a place untouched by commercial roads or tourists. It had no electricity, just a wood stove, a hand pump, for water, and maps pinned across the walls. He laid her on a cot, cleaned her wounds with boiled herbs, and spooned warm broth into her mouth as she regained strength in silent intervals. His name was Walter. He'd once worked under Ava's father, back when the Wildlife Trust was about preservation, not profit. He hadn't known Ava well back then. She was a teenager when he left, frustrated by corporate interference. But he recognized her now. The shape of her eyes, the scar near her chin, and the way she refused to cry despite everything. 3 days passed before Ava's voice returned. "No phones," she said softly, her words deliberate. "No news. No one can know I'm alive." Yet, Walter didn't question it. He simply nodded, then handed her a journal to write in case she needed to express things without speaking. The third night, while checking the stove, Ava noticed a box buried beneath an old tarp in the corner of the hut. It was wooden, locked, and carved with a symbol she hadn't seen since childhood, the crescent and lion insignia her father used on his personal files. Walter noticed her staring and pulled it out without hesitation. "He asked me to keep it safe," he said. "Told me not to open it unless something didn't feel right." Ava took it with trembling hands. The key had been taped beneath the lid. Inside, everything her father had tried to protect still waited. Original deed titles, all with her name. Trust fund transfer forms, unsigned but drafted. A sealed will. Amendment that revoked Liam's power over the board. Audio cassette tapes labeled by date. And tucked in the side was a single envelope with her name in her father's handwriting. She couldn't read it. Not yet. Her hands trembled too badly. Instead, she focused on the documents. It became clear within an hour. The entire trust Liam ran was never his. It had always been hers, set to transfer upon her marriage. But the paperwork had been delayed. When her father fell ill, Ava had trusted Liam to finalize it. Instead, he buried it. Legally, she still owned everything, unless she was declared unstable, missing, or dead. That's why he'd left her in the reserve. Later that night, she opened the audio tapes. Walter still had an old cassette player. Her father's voice filled the cabin, scratchy but warm. He spoke of growing distrust toward Liam, of finding inconsistencies in Liam's reports, of watching Bianca linger in places she didn't belong. One tape, recorded a week before his death, detailed a medical file he'd discovered hidden in Bianca's name, an emergency hysterectomy after complications from an undisclosed surgery. "She can't have children," her father's voice whispered through the static. "Liam thinks I don't know, but if he tries to pass off her child as an heir, it won't be real." Ava dropped the player, her breath catching in her chest. Bianca was faking it. Every public gesture, every carefully crafted smile, a lie. And if that lie unraveled, so would everything. Walter sat beside her quietly. "You need help, girl," he said finally. "Legal help. Investigative help. Not from Suits. From someone who knows how to make noise without getting caught." He stood and walked to the back of the hut, pulling out an old satellite phone from a metal case. After a few minutes of adjusting wires and muttering about bad connections, he handed it to her. "He's my nephew, Jordan. Runs one of those truth blogs they're always trying to shut down. Doesn't trust anything unless it's got dirt on it." Ava took the phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. She wasn't ready for the world to know she was alive, but she was ready for one person to help her make it matter. The call connected. A groggy male voice answered. "Yeah?" Walter leaned in. "Jordan, it's Uncle W. I need you to come down to the cabin, now." "Uncle." "It's 6 a.m. It's about Ava Delaney." Silence on the line. Then a sharp inhale. "She's dead." "No," Walter said, glancing at Ava. "She's awake, and she has receipts." The line stayed silent for another second. Then, "I'll be there by noon." Ava lowered the phone slowly. Her eyes drifted back to the papers. On the floor. Everything Liam built was hers. Every gala, every check, every speech. And now Bianca's fake pregnancy? That was going to be their legacy? Not anymore. The world had forgotten her, but she was alive, and she wasn't done yet. Jordan arrived before noon, dusty from the road, carrying only a leather satchel and a small voice recorder. He looked nothing like a professional. Wrinkled shirt, scuffed boots, hair pulled into a lazy bun. But when he stepped into the cabin and saw the box of documents, his demeanor changed. He didn't speak much at first, just sat, listened to Ava's summary, then started going through the contents with sharp, clinical focus. His fingers moved quickly over signatures, dates, paper textures. He knew what to look for. "This is big," he muttered, eyes narrowing as he spread the estate files across the table. "If this holds, you never stopped owning the trust. They just pushed you out of your own legacy." Ava sat on the edge of the cot, arms wrapped around herself. "Can we prove it?" Jordan nodded once. "We can prove more than that." Over the next 2 days, he tracked old court filings, public board meeting minutes, and legal transactions registered under the family foundation. One signature kept repeating, Ava's, in paperwork she never remembered signing. Another pattern emerged, a document filed 2 months before her father's death, petitioning for legal guardianship over his financial decisions. The claim? Mental instability due to early-onset dementia. It was signed by 2 witnesses, both employees, from a specific law firm Ava had used since college. Jordan's jaw tightened as he read. They had him declared legally incompetent. He couldn't update his will. That's how Liam froze the estate. Ava stared at the paper, numb. He wasn't sick. I saw him every day. He was silenced. And the lawyer you trusted signed off on it. Jordan tossed the document onto the growing pile. That lawyer now sits on the Wildlife Trust's compliance board. Conflict of interest doesn't even begin to cover it. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and they were uglier than Ava had imagined. One night, while Jordan reviewed tape logs by candlelight, Ava went through the old audio cassette, marked only with a red X. Her father's voice, tired but still strong, cracked through the player. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't natural. And if you find this, don't trust the nurse. Her name is Bianca. She's not what she says she is. She knew me before she was hired. I believe she came through Liam." Ava's breath hitched. She rewound and replayed the line. "Bianca was his nurse?" Jordan looked up. "Wait, what?" "She worked for my father before Liam and I got married," Ava whispered. "He told me she left for another family." Her hand trembled slightly. "She didn't. She stayed, as his nurse. She must have met Liam while—" Her voice broke off as the implication hit. "She was already involved with my father." Jordan was silent. Then he sat back. That would explain why Liam was so quick to cover medical records, why he's pushing the pregnancy story, to distract from something else. He scribbled notes furiously. "We need to track Bianca's employment history. If she was listed under another name while working as your father's nurse, this gets dirtier." The final blow came 2 days later. Ava left the cabin at dawn and took the old trail leading into town, her hood up, her pace slow. Walter had arranged a quiet meeting inside the back office of a retired notary. Ava needed someone she trusted, or thought she did. Zoe arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses, on acting surprised. "Oh my God, Ava, you're alive?" Ava didn't smile. "Close the door." Zoe hesitated, then stepped inside and locked it behind her. "What happened to you? Liam said—" "Stop." Ava's voice cut cold. I know what he said. I know what you told him." Zoe blinked, her smile faltering. "Told him? I wasn't dead. I was pregnant and bleeding. You were supposed to be my friend. And yet every sonogram appointment I skipped? Liam knew. Every time I left the city? He knew. Zoe's voice dropped. Ava, I didn't mean to hurt you. You fed Bianca information for months. Zoe swallowed. I needed the money. My rent, my job at the studio ended and she offered help. I thought, it wasn't going to be like this. Ava stared at her, silent. Her lip quivered once, but she didn't cry. You were there the night my mother died, she said quietly. You stood next to me at the funeral, and you sold me for rent. Zoe's eyes welled, but Ava didn't give her the chance to speak again. She turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her. Her legs buckled as she stepped outside. She dropped to the sidewalk, hand gripping the edge of the stone wall for balance. Her stomach tightened. Passers-by moved around her, not stopping. She stayed there for nearly 10 minutes, until her hands stopped shaking. Then she stood up, brushed the dirt off her coat, and whispered to herself, I'm done hiding. Back at the cabin, Jordan looked up from his laptop as she entered. You okay? Ava didn't answer. She walked over, picked up the trust papers, and began sorting them into files by category: medical, financial, legal. Her fingers were steady now. Her eyes sharp. She'd buried the truth long enough. Now she was ready to burn their lies down. The city skyline looked different from behind tinted glass, but Ava didn't flinch as the cab weaved through the traffic. Her hair was darker now, chopped short with a blunt edge, her features sharper under the lack of sleep and makeup. The name on her ID, her business card, her bank account, all read L. Vance. No traces of Ava Delaney remained. Only the shares she had started purchasing under shell corporations, quietly, methodically, until her presence began forming shadows on the company's balance sheets. No one knew where the transactions originated. But someone was coming. She entered the gala with silent confidence, her black dress modest but tailored, her face partially covered by a thin veil and designer glasses. The Wildlife Healing Trust's annual fundraiser glowed with lights, music, and polished smiles. Liam was on stage thanking donors for their unwavering belief in our vision. Bianca stood near the front, her hand resting gently over her swollen midsection, the sapphire earrings catching the spotlight again. Guests applauded as a massive display screen showed plans to transition part of the untouched reserve into luxury eco-villas. Ava's jaw clenched. At the edge of the room, 2 waitstaff whispered near the kitchen entrance. One passed a phone to the other. The message had just come in. She's here. Floor 2. Stay close to audio feeds. They were part of Ava's team now. Former interns, disillusioned charity volunteers, and one IT consultant she'd met through Jordan, all placed carefully inside the foundation over the past month. They fed her board memos, financial projections, even audio snippets from Liam's private calls. 3 days later, Ava sat inside a private boardroom high above the city. She wore a navy suit and introduced herself as L. Vance, legal advisor, from a compliance auditing firm representing minority shareholders. She kept her voice low, her gaze professional. Across the table, Bianca's eyes flicked toward her once, then again. Something in her shifted. Have we met before? She asked. No, Ava replied flatly. I would have remembered. The board discussed development rights. Bianca spoke confidently about strategic repurposing of the western portion of the reserve. Ava leaned forward. Is this in accordance with the easement clause filed under the 2004 Conservatory Act? The room went quiet. Bianca blinked. What clause? Ava smiled faintly. It's in the Land Trust's charter. Unless amended, any commercial development must be approved by the original trustee or the surviving heir. Has that signature been secured? Liam cleared his throat. Our legal team confirmed all compliance boxes have been checked. Ava nodded once and took notes. No one noticed the tiny recorder clipped beneath her pen. Every hesitation, Every deflection, all captured. Later that night, Bianca stood in front of the mirror in the gala's private lounge. She removed her earrings, but her eyes didn't leave the mirror. For a flash of a second, she saw someone behind her. Just a silhouette, the same jawline, the same eyes. She turned sharply. The room was empty. Her hands trembled as she resecured the door. Outside, the music played on. The next morning, a courier in a gray uniform rang the penthouse. Bianca opened the door herself, expecting a designer package from Europe. The man handed her a sleek black box, nodded once, and left. She brought it into the living room, where Liam was sipping his coffee, scrolling through articles about the board's upcoming press release. Bianca opened the box slowly. Her breath caught. Inside was a silicone baby bump, identical to the one she'd been wearing for the past month, and a note. Lions don't lie. She nearly dropped the box. Liam turned, confused, then saw the contents. His face went pale. Where did this come from? He asked. She didn't answer. He reached for the packaging label. There's no sender, no return address. Bianca stood frozen, gripping the edges of the note. She's back. Liam's voice dropped. She's dead. Bianca looked up, and for the first time her voice cracked. No, she's watching. Somewhere downtown, Ava stood inside a nondescript office filled with security monitors and digital logs. Jordan tapped on a tablet, displaying transaction trails and recorded board conversations. You've got them cornered, he said. They're cracking. Ava watched the screen without blinking. They wanted a ghost, she murmured. Now they have one. And in the reflection of the glass, her old face no longer stared back. Only Elle remained, the one who came to take back everything. The Wildlife Legacy Awards Gala was being streamed live across national channels, hailed as the pinnacle event for global conservation. The ballroom was a masterpiece of orchestration. Crystal chandeliers glowing above a glass stage, silk banners bearing Liam's logo swaying gently behind the podium. Spotlights moved like slow rivers across rows of donors, politicians, celebrities, and press. Cameras clicked rhythmically as Liam stepped forward, polished and poised, delivering a rehearsed tribute to progress, resilience, and legacy. Bianca stood at his side, radiant in a shimmering silver gown that hugged her form, including the carefully strapped-on baby bump beneath. Her hair was curled to perfection, her hand resting gently atop the curve of her false pregnancy. And now, Liam said with a beaming smile, the woman who's not only transformed conservation, but also brought a new future to this foundation, Bianca Carter. Applause rose as Bianca took center stage. She adjusted the microphone, blinking once under the hot lights. Thank you. When I first joined this mission, I never imagined the honor of carrying its legacy, of building something enduring for the planet and for the next generation. Her fingers grazed her belly with practiced grace. This child will grow up knowing his parents saved something beautiful. Then the projector behind her flickered. The image glitched. The foundation's logo dissolved into static. Bianca turned, confused, as a new image began forming. Not part of the scheduled presentation, a black and white video flickered onto the screen. A grainy living room. A man's voice, thick with age but sharp in tone. The words were unmistakable. If anything happens to me, it wasn't natural. And don't trust the nurse. Her name is Bianca. She knew me before she worked here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. On screen, the tape continued. She was close to Liam. I believe they've planned this. My daughter doesn't see it yet. But if she finds this, she'll know I never signed the estate papers. Bianca stepped back from the microphone, her chest rising and falling. The screen shifted. Page after page of scanned documents began, displaying, side by side with their original timestamps and handwriting samples. A highlighted signature at the bottom, Ava Delaney, but overlaid across it, in bold red text, forged. Reporters snapped to attention, phones raised, flash after. Flash medical files came next. Bianca's hospital record, dated 2 years earlier, clearly marked total abdominal hysterectomy. No future pregnancies. The room turned to ice. Liam took a step toward the tech booth, waving. "Kill the feed!" But the audio continued, Jordan's voice now reading aloud excerpts from board meeting notes, financial misappropriations, insider, trading. Every claim tied back to the Delaney Trust. And then, the ballroom doors opened. Ava entered. She moved slowly, deliberately, her figure still curved with late pregnancy. Her gown wasn't new. It was the same ivory silk dress she'd worn at her wedding. The necklace around her throat glinted, the one Liam once promised had belonged to his mother. Her steps echoed across the hall, louder than the stunned silence that followed. Bianca took a sharp breath and turned toward Liam. "Do something," she hissed. But Liam didn't move. His eyes were locked on Ava, his face pale, his jaw tight. Ava stopped at the base of the stage. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. Reporters swarmed forward, shouting questions. "Is that Ava Delaney? Were you held captive? Is the pregnancy real? Did Liam forge your signature?" Bianca lunged for Liam's hand, squeezing it tightly as cameras zoomed in. But Liam yanked it away, stepping back like her touch burned. A board member, near the side of the stage, raised a hand and called for silence. "Due to the documents just made public and the unexpected appearance of Ms. Delaney, we are initiating an immediate internal investigation." He paused, then looked at Ava. "Effective. Now, all pending transactions are frozen." Security turned toward the exits. A pair of officers in plain clothes stepped forward from the crowd. Bianca backed away, stumbling slightly in her heels. One of the security staff whispered, "Is she even pregnant?" Another officer approached her. "Ms. Carter, we'll need to speak with you privately about these records." "No," Bianca snapped, her voice cracking. "This is all fake. She's supposed to be dead." A sudden pop echoed as her baby bump strap snapped loose, sending the silicone mold sliding beneath her dress. It thudded onto the stage floor. The room gasped. Bianca froze, stunned. She reached for it instinctively, but it rolled out of her. Grasp. A collective murmur rose among the guests, journalists capturing every frame. Bianca's face twisted, part rage, part humiliation. She turned to Liam for support, but he was already gone, slipping behind the curtains, his name echoing through the room like a curse. The officers moved in. Ava still hadn't spoken. She stepped onto the stage slowly, picking up the necklace from her dress and holding it between her fingers. Her eyes scanned the crowd, familiar faces, new faces, all of them watching her like a ghost had returned. She looked down at Bianca once more, the woman who tried to steal her life, her legacy, her child's future. Ava didn't need to say anything. The truth had already spoken for her, and it was louder than any lie ever told. The ribbon fluttered in the breeze as the crowd gathered beneath the tall stone arch that marked the entrance to the newly restored sanctuary. The old sign was gone. In its place, hand-carved letters gleamed in gold. The Delaney Refuge, for women and wildlife. There were no champagne bottles, no red carpets. Just women holding their children. Some with scarred hands, others with uncertain smiles. And beside them, caretakers leading rescued animals from shaded pens into open pastures. At the front stood Ava, dressed in quiet earth tones, her newborn tucked snugly to her chest in a linen sling. Her fingers brushed the baby's back gently as she stepped forward to speak. She didn't talk long, just thanked the team, the survivors, the donors who stepped up quietly when it mattered. She said the land was never meant to be sold, that healing takes many forms. And then she stepped back, handing the mic to a woman who had escaped a trafficking ring in the city and now trained lion cubs in behavioral rehab. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real, grounded, pure. Behind the crowd, a group of Foundation board members handed her the final deed, the amended trust. Her father's signature was preserved, the forged pages nullified. Her name etched into the corner in legal permanence. No more delays, no more secrets. Bianca never made it to trial. The footage from the gala went viral within hours. Between the fake pregnancy, medical fraud, and impersonation, prosecutors had enough to hold her without bail. Her lawyer argued mental instability, but even that couldn't protect her from the financial crimes she committed under Liam's instructions. The sapphire earrings were returned to Ava in a plain envelope, unclaimed. Ava didn't open it. Liam vanished for a time. Rumors said he fled to Europe. Others claimed he was under house arrest in a coastal mansion, abandoned by his shareholders. Lawsuits stacked high: fraud, embezzlement, forgery. The board unanimously removed him as trustee. His empire crumbled in silence. No cameras, no applause. Jordan stood near the back of the sanctuary gates during the reopening, arms crossed, watching with a quiet smile. He didn't take credit. He never wanted to. Walter was there too, leaning on his cane, dressed in a slightly oversized suit, eyes wet with pride. They said nothing to Ava that day. They didn't need to. Later that week, when the visitors left and the sanctuary quieted, Ava walked the outer reserve trail alone, except for the infant resting against her chest. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just boots, a soft shirt, and the kind of tired peace that only comes after surviving hell and reclaiming what was once stolen. The land was greener now. Some of the old watchtowers had been converted into ranger shelters. The broken fences had been reinforced, not to keep anything in, but to keep predators like Liam out. She paused at the ridge near the lion habitat, the very spot where she once lay bleeding, abandoned. Now, flowers grew nearby. The viewing tower had been repaired. The lions hadn't left. One of them, the same one, or so she believed, emerged from the brush and stood beside her. It didn't growl, didn't pace, just stood, breathing, present, as if recognizing her not as prey but as something else entirely. In the distance, a news van pulled up along the outer road, cameras poking from the window, someone holding up a... Ava saw them. She didn't flinch. She didn't wave. She turned toward the old safari gate, now repainted gold and inscribed with a new phrase carved into the beam above it. Here walk those who survived. Ava stood there for a moment, the lion still beside her, her baby sleeping in peaceful silence. She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the trees, and everything that had been taken from her now rested where it belonged. Not in courtrooms or headlines, but in soil, in roots, in the breath of new life. She stepped forward, not into the past, into the future. She built herself. They left her to be eaten, but she walked out a lioness and built a kingdom they could never enter. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and stay with us for more.